Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad. We will cover Book 18 today. You may have noticed in the last episode that I stopped giving episode numbers in addition to identifying the book being covered. When I started this podcast, I envisioned covering multiple books per episode, and maybe having a total of about 12 episodes to cover the 24 books of the Iliad. But as my process in preparing this podcast has developed, I've realized that I've got more than enough content for a full episode in each book. And I really have to rein myself in, especially as I'm constantly tempted to go off on digressions regarding the countless references to other myths that we find throughout the Iliad. So for the rest of the series, we'll just call each episode by the book number it covers. So on to Book 18, after a brief Book 17 recap. In Book 17, we watched as the Greeks fought to recover the body of Patroclus from the battlefield to prevent his remains from falling into the hands of the Trojans. Hector wanted to cut off Patroclus' head as a trophy and feed his body to the dogs. Keeping this from happening was obviously as important to the Greeks as it would be to us in order to preserve the dignity of our loved departed. But it also had significant religious implications to them as well. In ancient Greek religion, performing proper burial rites for the body of the dead is how you ensured that the spirit could move on from this world to the next. By the end of Book 17, the Greeks had finally succeeded in bringing Patroclus' body back to the remains of the Greek defenses, with Menelaus and Meriones carrying him and the two Aiases defending them from the constantly attacking Trojans. However, we have not yet seen Achilles' reaction to this terrible news of Patroclus' death. Back when Patroclus went out to battle, dressed as Achilles to fool the Trojans into thinking that Achilles himself had re-entered the fight, Achilles warned Patroclus not to assail the city of Troy itself, and he'd expressed the wish that, so long as just he and Patroclus survived this war, he could be happy. Unfortunately, in the heat of battle, Patroclus had violated that one command, and the god Apollo himself threw down Patroclus from the Trojan city wall. Patroclus' fate was sealed from that moment. Now, with Patroclus gone, how will Achilles react? His purpose in life, his source of happiness is gone. He might just finally abandon the war entirely. From the battle, the Greeks had sent a fast young runner, Nestor's son Antilochus, to the camp to bring Achilles the terrible news. And this is where Book 18 begins, with Antilochus approaching Achilles with his message. Seeing Antilochus running toward him, and great numbers of the Greeks following, retreating from the battle, Achilles says to himself, "Ay me, wherefore again are the flowing-haired Achaeans flocking to the ships, and flying in rout over the plain? May the gods not have wrought against me the grievous fears at my heart, even as my mother revealed and told me that while I am yet alive, the best man of the Myrmidons must by deed of the men of Troy forsake the light of the sun. Surely now must Menoetios' valiant son be dead. Foolhardy! Surely I bade him, when he should have beaten off the fire of the foe, to come back to the ships, nor with Hector fight amain." Antilochus approaches Achilles, tears running down his face, and says, "Ay me, wise Peleus' son, very bitter tidings must thou hear, such as I would had never been. Fallen is Patroclus, and they are fighting round his body, naked, for his armor is held by Hector of the glancing helm." Now we will see an outpouring of grief, and to some extent, what we'll see is due to the melodramatic nature of the Iliad. But there's also a cultural component at play here, and in order to appreciate what we're about to see, I think it's important for us to look at how grief was expressed in ancient Greece. In ancient Greek culture, and in the ancient Mediterranean more broadly, expressions of grief took on forms that were very different from what we're used to now. Grief often involved very physical, outward signs of the emotional depression and loss felt within. For instance, if you study the Bible, you'll often come across the phrase sackcloth and ashes, meaning that people in ancient Hebrew culture would smear or pour ashes over themselves and wear uncomfortable and unflattering clothing made from the rough cloth used to make bags for carrying goods. The ancient Greek culture was similar, defiling oneself with ashes, and they engaged in loud public wailing. The ashes may be a reflection both of wanting to debase oneself and not enjoy the good things of life, since the deceased loved one can no longer enjoy these things. And keep in mind that the afterlife was seen as a gray, boring, meaningless eternity. Heaven was not in the picture for them. With the body dead, the ability to enjoy things was forever gone as well. As for the wailing, by the time of classical Athens, the public wailing at funerals was seen as completely out of hand, with a tradition of actually hiring women to wail at funerals having developed by this time, and a law was written to limit this so that only kinswomen of the dead could wail at funerals to get these excessive displays of loud public grief under control. There's a lot more on this topic available in a book titled The Ritual Lament in Greek Tradition by Margaret Alexiou, which I've linked to in the show notes. So with this understanding of grief in mind, let's proceed to the lamentation of Patroclus. Achilles, having received this terrible news, reacts silently at first. A black cloud of grief enwrapped Achilles, and with both hands he took dark dust and poured it over his head and defiled his comely face. And on his fragrant doublet black ashes fell, and himself in the dust lay mighty and mightily fallen, and with his own hands tore and marred his hair. And the handmaidens, whom Achilles and Patroclus took captive, cried aloud in the grief of their hearts, and ran forth around valiant Achilles, and all beat on their breasts with their hands, and the knees of each of them were unstrung. And Antilochus on the other side wailed and shed tears, holding Achilles' hands, while he groaned in his noble heart, for he feared lest he should cleave his throat with the sword. Now Achilles gives voice to his grief, and the scene of mourning and lamentation will quickly shift to the divine realm under the sea, to his mother, the sea goddess Thetis. And upon hearing the grief of her son Achilles, Thetis will immediately know that her son's fate is now sealed. Like Patroclus touching the walls of Troy, or Hector putting on the armor of Achilles, Achilles now, by giving voice to his grief, commits himself to his own fate, to the final act of his life. Then terribly moaned Achilles, and his lady mother heard him as she sate in the depths of the sea beside her ancient sire. And thereon she uttered a cry, and the goddesses flocked around her, and all the daughters of Nereus that were in the deep of the sea. There were Glauce, and Thalaea, and Cymodoce, Nisaea, and Spio, and Thoe, and Oxide Haliae, and Chymothoe, and Octae, and Limnoria, and Melite, and Iaria, and Amphithoe, and Agae, and Doto, and Proto, and Pharusa, and Dynamene, and Dexamene, and Amphinome, and Callianera, and Doris, Panope, and noble Galatea, and Nemertes, and Apsuades, and Callianassa, and there were Clymene, and Ianara, and Ianassa, and Myra, and Orithaia, and fair tressed Amathia, and other Nereids that were in the deep of the sea. With these the bright cave were filled, and they all beat together on their breasts, and Thetis led the lament. Listen, sister Nereids, that ye all may hear and know well what sorrows are in my heart. Ay me unhappy, ay me that bear to my sorrow the first of men. For after I had borne a son noble and strong, the chief of heroes, and he shot up like a young branch, then when I had reared him as a plant in a very fruitful field, I sent him in beaked ships to Ilios to fight against the men of Troy. But never again shall I welcome him back to his home, to the house of Peleus. And while he yet liveth in my sight and beholdeth the light of the sun, he sorroweth. Neither can I help him any whit, though I go unto him. But I will go, that I may look upon my dear child, and learn what sorrow hath come to him, though he abide aloof from the war. It's the death of Patroclus that will finally drive Achilles to take the steps that will ultimately lead to his own death. And Thetis knows this and realizes that his days are numbered now. Thetis comes up from the sea along with this throng of Nereids, and they walk up upon the shore and surround Achilles. and lamenting in what the narrator describes as a shrill voice, I suppose because that's the appropriate way a female is supposed to express herself at a time of mourning in this culture, Thetis says to her son Achilles, "My child, why weepest thou? What sorrow hath come to thy heart? Tell it forth, hide it not. One thing at least hath been accomplished of Zeus according to the prayer thou madest, holding up to him thy hands, that the sons of the Achaeans should all be pent in at the ships through lack of thee, and should suffer hateful things." And maybe it's because she's a goddess and she can't really connect with a mortal son despite loving him, but this consolation speech just doesn't hit the mark, reminding Achilles that it was his prayer to Zeus that was answered, that it was by his own doing that the suffering of the Greeks was brought about, which led Patroclus to fight and die. This isn't at all consoling, although I think she means it to be. Like, hey, remember, you must be important in the cosmic scheme of things because Zeus the Mighty answered your prayer. This as consolation just doesn't work when it's being said to one who is bound by fate, but voiced by one who isn't. But she's the only mother Achilles has ever known, and he must be used to this mortal versus immortal chasm between their worldviews, because he answers her, "My mother, that prayer truly hath the Olympian accomplished for me. But what delight have I therein, since my dear comrade is dead, Patroclus, whom I honored above all my comrades, as it were my very self? Him have I lost, and Hector that slew him hath stripped from him the armor great and fair, a wonder to behold, that the gods gave to Peleus, a splendid gift, on the day when they laid thee in the bed of a mortal man. Wouldst thou hadst abode among the deathless daughters of the sea, and Peleus had wedded a mortal bride. But now that thou mayest have a sorrow 1,000-fold in thy heart for a dead son, never shalt thou welcome him back home, since my soul biddeth me also live no longer nor abide among men, if Hector be not first smitten by my spear, and yield his life, and pay for his slaughter of Patroclus, Menoetios' son." Achilles packs a lot into these few lines. He can't find any joy in Zeus's granting of his prayer without Patroclus, and so he doesn't want to live anymore. And he knows that he will die soon. He feels he must kill Hector, that getting revenge is his only purpose left in life. But that divine armor, which was given to his father as a wedding gift, is now in Hector's hands. And Thetis responds to him simply that, "Indeed, son, I believe your life is now short, because your death will soon follow that of Hector." Achilles doesn't care that he will die soon, nor does he doubt that he will accomplish the task of killing Hector. What he regrets is his own wrath, and he berates himself for this and all the evil his wrath has caused the Greeks. "Straightway may I die, since I might not succor my comrade at his slaying. He hath fallen afar from his country, and lacked my help in his sore need. Now, therefore, since I go not back to my dear native land, neither have at all been succor to Patroclus, nor to my other comrades that have been slain by noble Hector, but I sit beside my ships, a profitless burden of the earth. I that in war am such an one as is none else of the mail-clad Achaeans, though in council are others better, may strife perish utterly among gods and men, and wrath that stirreth even a wise man to be vexed, wrath that, far sweeter than trickling honey, waxeth like smoke in the breasts of men, even as I was wroth, even now against Agamemnon, king of men. But bygones will we let be, for all our pain, curbing the heart in our breasts under necessity. Now go I forth, that I may light on the destroyer of him I loved, on Hector. Then will I accomplish my death, whensoever Zeus willeth to accomplish it, and the other immortal gods. For not even the mighty Heracles escaped death, albeit most dear to Cronian Zeus the king. But fate overcame him, and Hera's cruel wrath. So also shall I, if my fate hath been fashioned likewise, lie low when I am dead. But now let me win high renown. Let me set some Trojan woman, some deep-bosomed daughter of Dardanos, staunching with both hands the tears upon her tender cheeks, and wailing bitterly, yea, let them know that I am come back, though I tarried long from the war. Hold not me then from the battle in thy love, for thou shalt not prevail with me. I go now to battle, Achilles says. My wrath I regret, that wrath sweeter than honey, and anyone who has cherished an angry wish for justice can understand this. Achilles says that the Trojan women will weep once I've accomplished my work, and mother, don't try to stop me. Once I'm done, I'll accept whatever fate is in store for me, but not before. Now is the time to avenge Patroclus. But Thetis isn't going to try to stop Achilles. She knows that his fate has been sealed from the moment he received word of Patroclus' death and screamed in anguish. However, she cannot let him go into battle without armor. She now reveals her plan. Yea, verily, my child, no blame is in this, that thou ward sheer destruction from thy comrades in their distress. But thy fair glittering armor of bronze is held among the Trojans. Hector of the glancing helm beareth it on his shoulders in triumph, yet not for long, I ween, shall he glory therein, for death is hard anigh him. But thou go not yet down into the melee of war until thou see me with thine eyes come hither. In the morning will I return, at the coming up of the sun, bearing fair armor from King Hephaestus. Thetis wants Achilles to wait before returning to battle, to wait just one night, while she goes to the divine metalsmith Hephaestus to get new armor for her son. Thetis now speaks to the assembled Nereids. Ye now go down within the wide bosom of the deep, to visit the ancient one of the sea and our father's house, and tell him all. I am going to high Olympos, to Hephaestus of noble skill, if haply he will give unto my son noble armor shining gloriously. Thus spake she, and they forthwith went down beneath the surge of the sea. And the silver-footed goddess Thetis went on to Olympus, that she might bring noble armor to her son. Now, let's back up a bit to the very end of Book 17, when Menelaus and Meriones, defended by the two Aiases, had carried the body of Patroclus back from the battlefield and to the edges of the ruined Greek defenses. It had seemed that they had succeeded in securing Patroclus' body, finally, after fighting the Trojans over it for all of Book 17. However, while Thetis and Achilles have been talking, Hector and the Trojans have still been hard at work, continuing to press the Greeks in their unrelenting attempt to win that prize, the body of Patroclus, whose loss would so demoralize the Greeks. Let's now go over to the defenses and see what's happening while Achilles and Thetis have been talking. Here are the defenses. We find that things are no longer going so well for the Greeks. The Achaeans, with terrible cries, were fleeing before man-slaying Hector till they came to the ships and to the Hellespont. Nor might the well-grieved Achaeans drag the corpse of Patroclus, Achilles' squire, out of the darts, for now again overtook him the host and the horses of Troy, and Hector, son of Priam, in might as it were a flame of fire. Thrice did glorious Hector seize him from behind by the feet, resolved to drag him away, and mightily called upon the men of Troy. Thrice did the two Iantes, clothed on with impetuous might, beat him off from the dead man, but he natheless, trusting in his might, anon would charge into the press, anon would stand and cry aloud, but he gave ground never a whit. As when shepherds in the field avail no wise to chase a fiery lion in fierce hunger away from a carcass, so availed not the two warrior Iantes to scare Hector, son of Priam, from the dead. Hector is about to seize the body of Patroclus after all. The scene now shifts back to Achilles and a message from Olympus. And now would Hector have won the body and gained renown unspeakable, had not fleet wind-footed Iris come speeding from Olympus with the message to the son of Peleus to array him, unknown of Zeus and the other gods, for Hera sent her. And she stood anigh and spake to him winged words. Rouse thee, son of Peleus, of all men most redoubtable. Succor Patroclus, for whose body is terrible battle afoot before the ships. There slay they one another, these guarding the dead corpse, while the men of Troy are fierce to hale him unto windy Ilios. And chiefliest noble Hector is fain to drag him, and his heart biddeth him fix the head on the stakes of the wall, when he hath sundered it from the tender neck. But arise, lie thus no longer. Let awe enter thy heart to forbid that Patroclus become the sport of the dogs of Troy. Thine were the shame if his body be entreated evilly. Now, Achilles questions Iris, first learning that it was Hera who sent her, not Zeus, who doesn't know about this message. For all we know in this moment, it's Zeus's plan to let Hector seize the body of Patroclus, but Hera is working to undermine. And while we can imagine that Achilles is immediately on board with saving Patroclus' body, he raises the objection that he doesn't have any armor yet. And the only other Greek whose armor would be big enough for him is Telamonian, who's currently in the battle. How can I stop Hector without armor? Iris responds, well are we also aware that thy noble armor is held from thee. But go forth unto the trench as thou art, and show thyself to the men of Troy, if haply they will shrink back and refrain them from battle. And the warlike sons of the Achaeans take breath amid their toil, for small breathing time is in the thick of fight. The appearance of Achilles, now that Patroclus is dead, would definitely be Achilles this time. But unarmed, against a fully raging Hector? We don't get any time to doubt this plan or hear if Achilles doubts it, because immediately Athene appears to Achilles. She must have been sent by Hera as part of the secret plan to rescue Patroclus. I imagine it's late in the afternoon by this time, as the battle over Patroclus has been going on for hours and hours. Athene removes the aegis from around her neck, that golden tasseled goatskin, ancient and terrifying, emblematic of Zeus, and storms and destruction and the supreme mastery of the cosmos. And for the only time that I'm aware of, a mortal. Well, let's have Homer describe to us this scene, my absolute favorite, the most haunting and beautiful image in all of the Iliad. Achilles, dear to Zeus, arose, and around his strong shoulders Athene cast her tasseled aegis, and around his head the bright goddess set a crown of a golden cloud, and kindled therefrom a blazing flame. And as when a smoke issueth from a city and riseth up into the upper air, from an island afar off that foes beleaguer, while the others from their city fight all day in hateful war. But with the going down of the sun blaze out the beacon fires in line, and high aloft rusheth up the glare for the dwellers round about to behold, if haply they may come with ships to help in need. Thus, from the head of Achilles soared that blaze toward the heavens. And he went and stood beyond the wall beside the trench, yet mingled not among the Achaeans, for he minded the wise bidding of his mother. There stood he and shouted aloud, and afar off Pallas Athene uttered her voice, and spread terror unspeakable among the men of Troy. Clear as the voice of a clarion, when it soundeth by reason of slaughtereth foemen that beleaguer a city, so clear ran forth the voice of Aeacides. And when they heard the brazen voice of Aeacides, the souls of all of them were dismayed, and the horses of goodly manes were fain to turn the chariots backwards, for they boded anguish in their hearts. And the charioteers were amazed when they saw the unwearying fire blaze fierce on the head of the great-hearted son of Peleus, for the bright-eyed goddess Athene made it blaze. Thrice from over the trench shouted mightily noble Achilles, and thrice were the men of Troy confounded and their proud allies. Yea, there and then perished 12 men of their best by their own chariot wheels and spears. But the Achaeans with joy drew Patroclus forth from the darts and laid him on a litter, and his dear comrades stood around lamenting him. And among them followed fleet-footed Achilles, shedding hot tears. For his true comrade he saw lying on the bier, mangled by the keen bronze. Him sent he forth with chariot and horses unto the battle, but home again welcomed nevermore. Then Hera the ox-eyed queen sent down the unwearying sun to be gone unwillingly unto the streams of ocean. So the sun set, and the noble Achaeans made pause from the stress of battle and the hazardous war. Achilles, standing on the Greek side of the trench, glowing like a fire, a clear, bright beacon, wearing the aegis of Zeus in the only instance I'm aware of a mortal doing so, his voice supernaturally amplified by the power of Athene, giving deafening voice to the rage and despair and loss and all the feelings we all feel in our hearts, full of infinite love and hope and hurt, confined, infinite hearts trapped within our finite bodies that will die before we can fulfill all our hopes or heal all our hurts or share all our love. Without even saying anything, Achilles is just screaming out everything in his heart across the battlefield so that all the battle stops. Every single Greek and Trojan hears him, and their hearts all skip a beat. But for the Trojans, the aegis borne by Achilles brings terror, while for the Greeks it heartens them, and they are finally able to bring Patroclus to safety once and for all, as Hera, still acting without the sanction of Zeus, now brings the sun down early, a sudden and supernatural end to the day, which brings an end to the day's fighting, now that the Greeks have accomplished this long-attempted task, the rescue of Patroclus. Now we shift to the Trojan camp, where Polydamas, among the Greek leaders, is speaking with Hector. The narrator compares these two men, saying that they were both born on the same night, but Polydamas was the wiser of the two, while Hector was stronger in battle. In the wake of Achilles' appearance, Polydamas wants Hector to have the Trojans retreat for the night back to the city of Troy. And so Polydamas says to Hector, "Take good heed on both sides, O my friends. For my part, I would have ye go up now to the city, not wait for bright morning on the plain beside the ships. For we are far off from the wall. So long as this man was wroth with noble Agamemnon, so long were the Achaeans easier to fight against. And I too rejoiced when I couched nigh their swift ships, trusting that we should seize the curved ships for a prey. But now am I sore afraid of the fleet son of Peleus. So exceeding fierce is his heart. He will not choose to abide in the plain where Trojans and Achaeans both in the midst share the spirit of war. But the prize he doth battle for will be our city and our wives. Now go we up to our fastness. Hearken unto me, for thus will it be. Now hath divine night stayed the fleet son of Peleus, but if tomorrow, full armed for the onset, he shall light upon us abiding here, well shall each know that it is he, for gladly will whosoever fleeth win to sacred Ilios. And many of the men of Troy shall dogs and vultures devour. Far be that from my ear. But if, though loth, we hearken unto my words, this night in council we shall possess our strength, and the city shall be guarded of her towers and high gates and tall, well-polished doors that fit thereon close shut. But at dawn of day in armor harnessed we will take our stand along the towers. Ill will he fare if he come forth from the ships to fight with us for our wall. Back to his ships shall he betake him, when in vain chase he hath given his strong-necked horses their fill of hasting ever whither beneath the town. But within it never will he have heart to force his way, nor ever lay it waste. Ere then shall he be devoured of the swift dogs." However, Hector, this Hector that we've seen him develop into as the war has worn on, this Hector is not willing to retreat or to listen to reason. And he responds, Polydamas, no longer to my liking dost thou speak now, in that thou biddest us go back and be pent within the town. Have ye not had your fill already of being pent behind the towers? Of old time all mortal men would tell of this city of Priam for the much gold and bronze thereof, but now are its goodly treasures perished out of its dwellings, and much goods are sold away to Phrygia and pleasant Maeonia, since mighty Zeus dealt evilly with us. But now when the son of crooked counseling Cronos hath given me to win glory at the ships, and to pen the Achaeans beside the sea, no longer, fond man, put such counsels among the folk. No man of Troy will hearken unto thee, I will not suffer it. But come, let us all be persuaded as I shall say. Sup now in your ranks throughout the host, and keep good ward, and each watch in his place. And whoso of the Trojans is grieved beyond measure for his goods, let him gather them together and give them to the people to consume in common. For it is better they have joy thereof than the Achaeans. Then at dawn of day, in armor harnessed at the hollow ships, we will arouse keen war. What though in very truth noble Achilles be arisen beside the ships? Ill shall he fare, if he will have it so. I at least will not flee from him out of the dread-sounding war, but full facing him will I stand, to try whether he win great victory, or haply I. The war god is alike to all, and a slayer of him that would slay. The Trojans cheer Hector. It's seen as a sign of bravery to remain in the field overnight. However, we shall see in the morning the consequences of this decision. For now, we return to the Greek camp, where there is grieving for Patroclus, and foremost among them is Achilles, surrounded by the Myrmidons, laying upon the dead man's chest and weeping, lamenting out loud, "Ay me, vainly, verily was the word I uttered on the day when I cheered the hero Menoetios in his halls, and said that I would bring back to Opoeis his son in glory from the sack of Ilios, with the share of spoil that should fall unto him. Not all the purposes of men doth Zeus accomplish for them. It is appointed that both of us redden the same earth with our blood here in Troyland. For neither shall the old knight Peleus welcome me home back within his halls, nor my mother Thetis, but even here shall earth keep hold on me. Yet now, O Patroclus, since I follow thee under earth, I will not hold thy funeral till I have brought hither the armor and the head of Hector, thy high-hearted slayer, and before thy pyre I will cut the throats of 12 noble sons of the men of Troy, for mine anger that thou art slain. Till then beside the beaked ships shalt thou lie as thou art, and around thee deep-bosomed women, Trojan and Dardanian, shall mourn thee weeping night and day, even they whom we toiled to win by our strength and our long spears, when we sacked rich cities of mortal men." Achilles is deferring the funeral of Patroclus until he can not only return with the armor that Hector stole and Hector's head, but he also vows to sacrifice 12 Trojan men. Thus will both Greeks and Trojans also weep at the funeral of Patroclus. Human sacrifice was not at all common in ancient Greece, not performed regularly, and the archaeological evidence for it is scant and confined to very, very ancient times. So that to the audience the Iliad was intended for, this plan of Achilles to sacrifice 12 Trojan men to assuage his own anger and to provoke Greek and the Trojans, such as he is now experiencing, this is nearly as shocking to the original audience as it is to us, although they would no doubt have resonated with and understood the religious implications more than we can. Achilles and the Myrmidons now ceremonially wash Patroclus' body and dress him in a white robe and surround him all night, moaning and weeping. Meanwhile, up on Olympus, Zeus has finally caught on to the fact that it's Hera who's accomplished all this, the secret plan she and Athene enacted to rescue Patroclus, and Zeus confronts Hera with nearly none of the anger we might have expected. "Thou hast accomplished this, O Hera, ox-eyed queen. Thou hast aroused Achilles, fleet of foot. Verily, of thine own children must the flowing haired Achaeans be." Then answered unto him Hera the ox-eyed queen, "Most dread son of Cronos, What is this word thou hast said? Truly even a man, I ween, is to accomplish what he may for another man, albeit he is mortal and hath not wisdom as we. How then was I, who avow me the first of goddesses, both by birth, and for that I am called thy wife, and thou art king among all immortals, how was I not in mine anger to devise evil against the men of Troy? The narrator now leaves this scene between Zeus and Hera with a brief indication that so they debated on this wise with one another. And we go now to the home and metalworking forge of Hephaestus, where he is busy making some new marvels. Tripods, which to us means a thing to mount a camera on, but to the ancients it was a simple three-legged piece of furniture used either as a seat or to mount a cooking pot over a fire. But these ones that Hephaestus is making, these had golden wheels and the ability to roll themselves about Olympus on their own. There are quite a few examples throughout Greek mythology of similar mechanical devices, almost robot-like things envisioned by ancient writers and usually said to have been crafted by Hephaestus. One of the most remarkable of these was Talos, a bronze giant that patrolled the shores of Crete, throwing giant stones at the ships of any potential invaders. Well, into Hephaestus' forge now comes Thetis, who is greeted by Hephaestus' wife, the Grace, or minor goddess named Charis. Other ancient writers have Hephaestus married to Aphrodite, but Homer has a number of differences in how he envisions the gods, and Aphrodite in particular. So Charis now greets Thetis. Wherefore, long-robed Thetis, comest thou to our house, honored that thou art and dear? No frequent comer art thou hitherto, but come onward with me that I may set guest cheer before thee. Charis makes Thetis welcome and comfortable, and calls for Hephaestus, who upon seeing Thetis welcomes her. Verily, a dread and honored goddess in my sight is she that is within, seeing that she delivered me when pain came upon me from my great fall through the ill will of my shameless mother, who would fain have hid me away, for that I was lame. Then had I suffered anguish of heart, had not Eurynome and Thetis taken me into their bosom. Eurynome, daughter of Ocean, that floweth back ever upon himself. 9 years with them I wrought much cunning work of bronze, brooches and spiral armbands and cups and necklaces in the hollow cave, while around me the stream of Ocean with murmuring foam flowed infinite. Neither knew thereof any other of gods or of mortal men, save only Thetis and Eurynome who delivered me. And now cometh Thetis to our house, wherefore behoveth it me verily in all wise to repay fair trust Thetis for the saving of my life. But do thou now set beside her fair entertainment, while I put away my bellows and all my gear. Hephaestus, like Zeus, has reason to owe Thetis a favor. In the story he recalls, he had been ejected from Olympus, this time not by Zeus, who famously threw Hephaestus off Olympus all the way to the Isle of Lemnos, but this time it was his own mother Hera who'd thrown him out, embarrassed by his imperfect lame leg. So we get a little insight into why, despite being an Olympian, Hephaestus feels the need to work so hard on his metalwork devices. He feels the need to ingratiate himself to the other gods and stay on their good side. Now we get a description of Hephaestus and of his handiwork, which is well worth sharing. From the anvil Hephaestus rose limping, a huge bulk, but under him his slender legs moved nimbly. The bellows he set away from the fire, and gathered all his gear wherewith he worked into a silver chest. And with a sponge he wiped his face and hands, and sturdy neck, and shaggy breast. And did on his doublet, and took a stout staff, and went forth limping. But there were handmaidens of gold, that moved to help their lord, the semblances of living maids. In them is understanding at their hearts, in them are voice and strength, and they have skill of the immortal gods. These moved beneath their lord. And he gat him haltingly near to where Thetis was, and set him on a bright seat, and clasped her hand in his, and spake, and called her by her name. Wherefore, long-robed Thetis, comest thou to our house, honored that thou art and dear? No frequent comer art thou hitherto. Speak what thou hast at heart. My soul is fain to accomplish it, if accomplish it I can, and if it be appointed for accomplishment. And Thetis wastes no time, but tells all to Hephaestus, the only god who can help her and Achilles now. Hephaestus, Hath there verily been any of all goddesses in Olympus that hath endured so many grievous sorrows at heart, as are the woes that Cronian Zeus hath laid upon me above all others? He chose me from among the sisters of the sea to enthrall me to a man, even Peleus, Aeacus' son. And with a man I endured wedlock, sore against my will. Now lieth he in his halls forspent with grievous age, but other griefs are mine. A son he gave me to bear and nourish, the chief of heroes, and he shot up like a young branch. Like a plant in a very fruitful field, I reared him and sent him forth on beaked ships to Ilios to fight against the men of Troy. But never again shall I welcome him back to his home within the house of Peleus. And while he yet liveth in my sight and beholdeth the light of the sun, he sorroweth. Neither can I help him any whit, though I go unto him. The maiden whom the sons of the Achaeans chose out to be his prize, her hath the Lord Agamemnon taken back out of his hands. In grief for her wasted he his heart, while the men of Troy were driving the Achaeans on their ships, nor suffered them to come forth. And the elders of the Argives entreated him, and told over many noble gifts. Then, albeit himself he refused to ward destruction from them, he put his armor on Patroclus, and sent him to the war, and much people with him. All day they fought around the Scaean gates, and that same day had sacked the town. But that when now Menoetius' valiant son had wrought much harm, Apollo slew him in the forefront of the battle, and gave glory unto Hector. Therefore now come I, a suppliant, unto thy knees, if haply thou wilt be willing to give my short-lived son shield and helmet, and goodly greaves fitted with ankle pieces, and cuirass. For the armor that he had erst, his trusty comrade lost, when he fell beneath the men of Troy, and my son lieth on the earth with anguish in his soul. Hephaestus, always eager for an opportunity to exercise his skill in metalwork, readily agrees to help her. Be of good courage. Let not these things trouble thy heart. Would that so might I avail to hide him from dolorous death, when dread fate cometh upon him, as surely shall goodly armor be at his need, such as all men afterward shall marvel at, whosoever may behold. Then saying, he left her there, and went unto his bellows, and turned them upon the fire, and bade them work. And the bellows, 20 in all, blew upon the crucibles, sending deft blasts on every side, now to aid his labor, and now anon howsoever Hephaestus willed, and the work went on. And he threw bronze that weareth not into the fire, and tin, and precious gold and silver. And next he set on an anvil stand a great anvil, and took in his hand a sturdy hammer, and in the other he took the tongs. Most of the rest of Book 18 is a very detailed description of the images that Hephaestus works into the shield that he's crafting for Achilles. This mini episode is, not surprisingly, referred to as the Shield of Achilles, and is the model for a number of later similar works by other authors, such as a poem describing the shield of Heracles, and much later a section in the Iliad describing Aeneas' shield. There is a great deal of scholarship out there on the meaning of the images Hephaestus depicts on Achilles' shield, and together these images seem to compile a microcosm of the whole created universe of Greek mythology. There are also many, many literal pictures of the shield, interpretations of course, to be found on the internet. Just type in Shield of Achilles and select image search, and you'll be blown away by the intricate and beautiful detail that various artists since Hephaestus have put into their interpretations of this section's language. However, as a narrative section of the Iliad, it's similar to the Catalogue of Ships and the upcoming funeral games for Patroclus in being a lengthy digression from the actual storyline we're pursuing here. And with the action climbing rapidly to its conclusion, I won't slow things down by reading the Shield of Achilles section to you. I will, however, get into the funeral games with you on this podcast. They're entertaining in and of themselves. They give us one final look at a number of our heroes, and they help Achilles transition to the man he becomes at the culmination of the Iliad. Book 18 concludes with the following. Now, when he had wrought the shield great and strong, then wrought he him a corslet, brighter than a flame of fire, And he wrought him a massive helmet to fit his brows, goodly engraven, and set thereon a crest of gold, and he wrought him greaves of pliant tin. So when the renowned lame god had finished all the armor, he took and laid it before the mother of Achilles. Then she like a falcon sprang down from snowy Olympus, bearing from Hephaestus the glittering arms. And thus we conclude Book 18. Come back next time for Book 19, at the dawning of the new day, when not only will Achilles receive his wondrous new armor, but finally and formally, Achilles will reconcile with Agamemnon, and the war can begin in earnest. With Achilles back in the action for the first time since before the Iliad even began, it will be a whole new war, and we'll see how the Greeks plus Achilles were a force that managed to subdue all the Troad, conquer all their towns except their single remaining city. All you've seen so far has been the Greeks minus Achilles, who maintain a stalemate at best. Things are really heating up and the end is in sight. Till next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.